Jujutsu Kaisen Chapter 233 spoilers are here, and we kick off right away with Yuji stating that even though Mahoraga is adapted with his infinity, they still remain on equal footing. Oh yeah, thank you to myamura for these chapter leaks. His account did get suspended, but there is a new one which I'll leave in the description down below. So getting back into the chapter, everyone else seems panicked by this revelation, so it's clear that Yuji knows Gojo best and knows full well that he's capable of taking Mahoraga down. Yuji also goes on to state that Gojo's wounds will soon be healed up, so even that slash from Mahoraga shouldn't affect him too much in this fight. We finally get to see Gojo reaching his limits of cursed energy output, which is refreshing for us because, to be totally honest, Gojo running out of cursed energy seemed like a concept which would literally never be explored in Jujutsu Kaisen. But basically, one of the characters, or Shoko, who I personally don't remember too well, seems to be very stressed out due to Gojo's reverse curse technique. It seems as though it's slowing down significantly. Shoko's indication of being stressed out is smoking tons of cigarettes, so that's kind of how we know that she's stressed out, if that makes sense. But Gojo being slow on his reverse curse technique means that if Sukuna was to barrage him with Cleave and Dismantle again, it would mean that Gojo would have no way of out-healing this damage like he did previously, likely leading him to lose the battle in that case scenario. We then see that even though Gojo was fighting the King of Curses, the strongest of all time, they still all had a sort of confidence that Gojo would end up victorious. But it seems as though the doubts are starting to overwhelm all of them, and their faith in Gojo seems to be slipping. Gojo himself is even doubtful as to whether he can win, and after assessing the situation, it seems as though he is finally prepared to lose this battle. Gojo reflects upon the last time he felt this kind of despair and feeling of loss and defeat, and the last time he can actually remember was against Toji. We see a panel of Gojo's perspective just staring down an absolute demon in the form of Toji, and I love this flashback. It's clear Gojo is at his limits, and if his final plan doesn't work, it will likely be the end for him. We are getting a lot of talk from the narrator in this chapter, but he goes further on to say that even though Gojo is losing and his defeat seems inevitable, there is a feeling within Gojo that seems to be emerging. This whole fight, Gojo was experiencing the satisfaction of fighting a strong opponent and finally being challenged. Even though he is near death, this feeling is what is driving him to continue. This parallels that of Saitama from One Punch Man, who constantly seems dissatisfied with his life due to the lack of challenge he experiences, but eventually is challenged by Cosmic Garou, in which he somewhat enjoyed, I guess. Gojo being by far the strongest sorcerer meant that there was a loneliness built up from never experiencing that challenge anymore. A common theme in the actual world where people at the very top of their class being unrivaled and then eventually losing motivation and then probably retiring. So a very human emotion from Gojo here, and it seems as though he's alright with being surpassed at the moment. Gojo says that Sukuna shouldn't be able to use their Shikigami without actually having to summon them, which we saw with Mahoraga, and Sukuna is using this again with Max Elephant, the Shikigami normally used to crush people, but instead he's using this to make a water shooting kind of thing in the form of piercing blood. Gojo goes on to explain that the reason Sukuna is using Shikigami a lot more freely is because Mahoraga has adapted to infinity. Therefore, Mahoraga can now do all the heavy lifting when it comes to the combat, and Sukuna can sit back and spam Shikigami abilities to catch Gojo off guard. The balance of this fight just goes further and further into Sukuna's favour with every passing chapter. Gojo explains that Mahoraga adapting to red is much more difficult than adapting to blue, likely due to red being an adaptation of blue by using curse technique reversal. It seems a more complex a technique the longer it takes for Mahoraga to adapt, which makes sense obviously. Sukuna interrupts Gojo here and says that this is not just a 2v1 anymore, and then summons a new Shikigami, which is a combination of Nue and Totality. This new Shikigami fusion is called Chimera Beast Agito, and looks insane, although I've definitely butchered that name. And the fight has now transitioned into becoming a 3v1. Gojo teases Sukuna, saying that he looks like a child surrounded by giants, suggesting that Sukuna has decided to pull out his fathers to fight for him. So the Shikigami and Sukuna all try and hit Gojo simultaneously, in which Gojo dodges all of them. And Sukuna then pops out of Gojo's shadow, which I forgot he could actually do using the 10 shadows technique. But when you think about this, that is a crazy technique which he has not used enough in this fight. Sukuna then uses Max Elephant's water ability again, in the form of piercing blood, which Gojo dodges once again. And all of a sudden Gojo goes on the offensive and appears behind Mahoraga, likely using his teleport ability from his limitless. This is because Mahoraga seems to not have even noticed that Gojo was behind him. And then he let off a huge red, but unfortunately the damage is weak, and Gojo realizes that in order to defeat Mahoraga, it needs to be a one-shot ability. And then all of a sudden we find out that Gojo has a technique which should allow him to defeat Mahoraga in one blast. And this ability is called Unlimited Hollow Technique. Now I would like to point out that I was part of the small minority who said that Gojo had a last ditch attack, which would be an adaptation of Limitless, in order to destroy Sukuna. A sort of last ditch attempt, which if it didn't work, then the battle would be over. But this is where the chapter leaves off, with a clear indication as to what the stakes for the next chapter will be. But this was just a brief overview of what this chapter will entail, but I'll do a full review of this chapter when it officially comes out on the 27th of August. But there is no break next week, so we'll get right back into the action in a week's time. But this chapter is very, very text heavy, so hopefully next chapter we can see a lot more combat. But that is all for this video. If you did enjoy, then make sure to like and subscribe, as it helps out the channel tons. Also, leave your thoughts on these spoilers in the comments down below. And with that all said, I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.